My name is George O'Connor, and this presentation relates to the food safety and regulations concerning the export of apples to Australia. New Zealand has always been known for producing some of the finest fruit and vegetables in the world. The New Zealand apple is no exception. As one of our most successful pit fruits, New Zealand is the only place in the world where apples are grown in a truly oceanic environment. Although there still have to be strict regulations and policies in place to keep the quality of the apples up to standards required by the Ministry of Primary Industries. Hawke's Bay is the area of New Zealand that produces the most of our apples because of its ideal conditions. One of our biggest export markets is to Australia. The growers. The supply chain begins with the actual growing of the apples. The first of these steps is making sure that all growers are registered with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. That is so they can be issued an individual registration number known as an ARPN. This is a unique registration number that is associated with all documentation related to fresh fruit production. This means that all production can be traced back to the ARPN, making sure that certain growers can be held accountable if there are problems with their apples. Integrated fruit production is the approach taken to pest control and to control pests and disease. Their goals have been to eliminate broad-spectrum insecticides, support selective management, and support reasonable use of fertilizers and water. All of these goals add up to a cleaner way to grow apples in the orchards. All growers have to record the use of agri-chemicals in an electronic spray diary. This is known as a pest control record. The PCR is submitted to Agri-Quality for verification. If the desired standards have been met, then a certificate is issued to the grower, and only then can harvest of the fruit begin to take place. If a violation is noticed, then the fruit from that orchard is taken for a residue test at the Agri-Quality labs. The clearance has to be cross-checked at the packhouse before the fruit can be accepted. There is also an extensive random sampling regime which is in place. This is known as the Agri-Quality National Random Residue Sampling Program. It is extremely effective for a complete residue analysis. The harvest. Quality control is an extensive part of the harvest. This is mainly in the form of making sure that the apples do not get bruised. Apple pickers had to be especially careful when taking them off the trees. All of this careful work will prevent bruising and mean that there are more apples to be able to be sold. From each bin, a sample of 50 to 100 apples is taken, depending on the size of the orchard. If more than 5 to 10% of these apples are not compliant with the quality standards, then warnings will be issued. In extreme cases, where there have been several warnings, this can lead to a dismissal of the orchard's apples being taken for harvest. Standards include wrong colour, bruises, stemless, and remaining buds. Harvesting is done by making sure that the workers are correctly trained. There are 3 simple rules to this. They need to be systematic, sticking to a certain area of the tree. They need to pick with 2 hands, again relating to the bruising, and they need to not pick all the bottom apples at once. These safety standards and tips are enforced so that there is a better workplace environment around harvesting apples, and so that all legal requirements concerning employment laws are met. Apples have to meet a market regulation as well. It is important for harvesters to notice early which are good apples and which are bad apples. Early warning signs mean that they may need to change in the growing of the apples or the chemicals that are applied to them. The packhouse. Apples are harvested into picking bags and the fruit is transported in bins. Apples come into the packhouse in bins as this is the largest and most effective transportation while keeping the apples in a healthy state. Once the fruit enters the packhouse, it is checked against a database. This is to establish that the fruit has actually been cleared for harvest and isn't a rogue batch that has slipped through. This is where ARPN comes into play again, because it is how apple submissions to the packhouse are identified. Apples are also identified by their variety, lot number, harvest date, and the destination country, which in our case is Australia. If the fruit is not packed immediately, then it is held under a mesh shade house or in refrigerated storage. No soaps, detergents, or cleaners are used on the fruit in compliance with MAF chemical regulations. There is a long and extensive procedure that needs to be met to make sure that the apples are correctly packed and ready to be transported. The process ensures that the apples are harvested one day and immediately put onto cool store the next. These bins are then tagged with all the grower's details, the variety, the pick date, and the ARPN number. Once the apples are in cool store, then the fruit is sorted, graded, which is done optically and by weight, before being packed to order for the consumer. Storage and transportation. Investment in traceability is a key in making sure that apples meet food safety requirements. This is because it has become a major issue worldwide. So the New Zealand apple industry has invested heavily over many years to ensure the minimum amount of human intervention in its growing practices, opting instead for biological, pest and disease management. This huge investment now means that the buyers and sellers of apples have to know where the apples have come from, where they have been, and where they will be going, making transportation so vital in sticking with regulations that keep New Zealand apples up to the standards the MAF expects and the Australian market wants. There has also been significant investment in developing systems that are effective in managing areas such as crop forecasting, management reporting, bin inventory, cool store inventory, and shipping and logistics. All of these areas enable the shipping and storage of the fruit to be executed under near perfect conditions, with little room for error and a greater emphasis on making sure that the apples are still in compliance with the MAF and MPR regulations. Fruit that has been packed and ready to order is pre-cooled and returned to the cool stores where it is ready to be exported. When transportation of the apples takes place, there are many functions that come into play, considering how to correctly transport an apple. It must be kept in the correct temperature, the distance between different sectors has to be accounted for, and the system of fruit transportation needs to be up to the highest standard possible. There are also regulations for the workers who do the loading and unloading of the apples when transporting fruit by tractor-mounted carriers, forklift, trailers or transporters. Safe working rules and practices must be observed. This ensures minimal risk to all operators. Exporting. According to MPI, if there is exporting of fresh apples to Australia, then they'll need to comply with extra phytosanitary requirements, which are import requirements undertaken by National Plant Protection Organisation. These requirements greatly affect exporters, but may also include requirements for growers, packers, and storage facility operators. Fruit needs to be exported in season so that no time or resources are wasted on the production and exportation process. There are 3 companies that are authorised to export apples to Australia. These 3 companies have to make sure that they uphold all the regulations at each supply stage. New Zealand apples can be exported to Australia, but they follow a strict biosecurity protocol to ensure Australia orchards remain disease-free. This is to prevent one of the most dangerous bacterial diseases known as fire blight, which New Zealand orchards have, from entering Australian orchards. Any shipment of New Zealand apples that do not meet Australia's import requirements will be instantly prohibited. There have also been examples of NZ apples being rejected by Australia because they failed to meet the trade protocol. The protocol to import apples into Australia requires that the fruit is inspected before the apples are shipped. Specifically, a minimum of 600 fruit samples from each lot of fruit packed must be inspected, and if found free of quarantine, pests and trash, then they may be free to begin process to be exported to Australia. Australia strongly supports the protocol so that they remain pest and disease free. In conclusion, exporting of apples to Australia is a process where many regulations and policies must be followed. Australia has become one of the biggest markets that we export to, and that is why food safety regulations are so vital in keeping production of the apples safe and keeping pests and diseases out of our apples and out of Australian markets. New Zealand has to make sure that all regulations are up to standard and with no flaws or misinterpretations. This is how New Zealand will strive in the exportation of apples to Australia if our fruit continues to strive. Thank you.